This morning there are 10 words that will determine your destiny. In fact, they're the 10 most important words in the whole universe. In fact, they're the foundation for every single one of us this morning that have a hope of eternal life that we are resting our eternal hope on. And they're so important and they're so vital that God put them first in the Bible so we wouldn't miss them. And if you want to turn to the first 10 words of the Bible, I want to read them to you this morning because these 10 vital words touch every part of our life. They're so crucial to the destiny of our souls. They're the first words that Jesus and the apostles read at their mother's knees. For all Jewish children were taught to read starting with the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses. And it was customary that the mother would inscribe on a slate those words and would put honey on them and would have the children lick the honey off the slate to teach them how sweet the Word of God was to their hearts. What were the first words that Jesus learned as a child? What were the first words the Apostle Paul and the Apostle Peter and the Apostle John and all the early saints of the church learned? Well, why don't we read them? I'll read them to you and you follow along. Genesis 1:1, the 10 words that you can stake your life on. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Just before I continue in our little series on the book you can trust, and this is our 4th part, and we're looking at the first book of the book you can trust, and I call it Genesis, take it or lose it. Either you believe Genesis or you lose everything. But I want to share with you, not from the Bible, I want to share with you from secular scientific discoveries, okay? And I spent some time this week and I condensed down a lot of stuff, and I know some of you can just kind of take a chill pill right now, and you know, it's going to be a little boring because this is all science stuff. But I was amazed this week that secular scientists, in fact, while I was waiting to have my hair cut, I picked up a magazine, and the article I opened to in U.S. News and World Report said that there's an evolutionary disconnect because everything we thought is not connecting with what we're finding. And that's in the U.S. News and World Report, which is not a glaring creationist publication. But I found that astrophysicists have garnered enough data to show beyond a doubt to them as a scientific community that this planet we float on in space is alone in the universe as far as life, as we know life to be, is concerned. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean by that is this, that scientists have discovered that there are a little less than, in the observable universe, a little less than 1 trillion galaxies. Now, a galaxy is a spinning cloud of stars. There's just a little less than 1 trillion of them. Each one of those galaxies averages 100 billion stars. So there's 1 trillion spinning 100 billion star galaxies, which, you know, that's already is beyond me. And we can see that by the following list I'm going to read to you, that if these 23 elements are not present in the order they're present on the earth, that there is no possibility of life being out there anywhere except here. Now listen to this. This is what the scientists said. Thus, with considerable security, we can draw the conclusion that much fewer than 1/trillionth of a trillionth of a percent of all stars in all the known stars in the observable universe could possibly possess a planet capable of sustaining life as we know it. Might I add, except for divine intervention, which is why we're here. Now, what do I mean by that? Now, here's what the scientists say. Number one, if our planetary system had more than one star, in other words, if there was a binary star or something else instead of one sun, our tidal interactions would disrupt our planet's orbit. If there was less than one star here, we would be frozen and we wouldn't be alive. If the sun that God created out there was older, and remember, he created full-blown reproducing things, so he didn't create a baby star growing up. He created a star at the right maturity. The sun that shines on us occasionally out there, if our sun was older, it would be dimming too quickly. If it was younger, it would be getting brighter and hotter too quickly. How about this? If the mass of our sun Our sun is 93 million miles away, and it's a star, a yellow star, and it's burning, and it's of a specific mass. If the mass of our sun was greater, the luminosity of our star would change too quickly. It would burn rapidly. The heavier they are, the faster they burn. If it was less mass, the range of distances appropriate to life would be too narrow. The tidal forces of our planet would disrupt the rotational period of our planet, and the UV radiation would be inadequate to make sugar and oxygen on the planet. Isn't that interesting? What I'm saying, I've lost half of you, but the first three conclusions the scientists have come to is, if we didn't have one star, if we had less than one or more than one, we wouldn't be here. If our star was fatter or older, we'd be gone. How about this one? The color of our sun. There are many different colors of stars. If our sun was redder, the photosynthetic response would be insufficient. Plants wouldn't grow. And if you don't have plants, we're gone. If it was bluer, the photosynthetic response wouldn't be there. In other words, we're the only color we can be to have life, yellow, which is life-giving sunlight. How about if the brightness of our sun? If the brightness was too much, we would have a runaway greenhouse effect. In this place, it would be so bright that we would all be in a sauna. And pretty soon, you know what happens if you're in there too long. Your skin gets white, and then it falls off. And If it was too dark, we would have runaway glaciation. That means we'd all be in coolies, like they sell at QT. We'd be freezing if it wasn't that way. How about the Earth? If the surface gravity, that's the escape velocity, that's how fast you have to go to get off the planet. If it was stronger, our atmosphere would retain too much ammonia and methane, and we would become like Jupiter. We'd be a gaseous graveyard. If our surface gravity was weaker, the water would all dissipate out into the universe where there isn't any water. By the way, there's no water that's ever been detected anywhere in the universe except in our solar system. And you can't have life without water as we know it. How about the Earth's distance from the sun? If we were further away, we'd be too cold. If we were closer, we would be burnt. How about the inclination of our orbit? That's the orbit as we go around like this, and then we revolve around the sun, the way we're inclined. If it was too great, the temperature differences on the planet would be so extreme that the place would be half desert and half frozen. If the inclination was not perfectly as it is, our seasonal temperature differences would be so much that our bodies could not live with the extreme 200 degree above zero to 100 degree below zero. How about the axial tilt? That's where our axis is on our planet. The Earth's not like this. It's slightly tilted. If it was greater, then the surface temperature difference would be too much between the North Pole, the equator, and the South Pole. If it was less, the same thing would happen. In other words, if the Earth was just sitting like this instead of like this, that little tiny tilt that someone put on the axis of this planet when they spun it off into space is so exact that it makes us have the beautiful seasons and the temperature variation. If our rotation period, that's how long it takes for a day, if it was longer, then the temperature difference would be too long different. Now it's kind of nice that it cools down at night, but what would you think if our Earth rotated every 30 days? How about if it was shorter? Well, the atmospheric wind velocities would be too great, and they wouldn't have to sell the movie Twister. You'd see it all the time, right? How about our magnetic field? You don't even realize the power of that. If it was stronger, then there would be electromagnetic storms so severe that they would impair everything as we know it as far as electronically, and it would start, how they say, watch out going through the little airport thing with your pacemaker on? Well, it would be hard to have your pacemaker on with the storms going on overhead. If the magnetic field was weaker, the ozone shield that is held in place by it would be inadequately protected, and hard stellar and solar radiation would just incinerate us. How about the thickness of our crust? Not talking about the homemade bread you have. I'm talking about on the Earth. The thickness of the crust. If our crust on this planet was thicker, too much oxygen would be transferred from the atmosphere to the crust. In other words, the crust absorbs atmosphere. And if our crust was thicker, it would go, and we'd all be going around wearing oxygen tanks because there wouldn't be enough to breathe. If it was thinner, volcanic and tectonic activity would destroy us all. In other words, if it was just a little peeling of crust instead of miles thick of plates, then we'd all be jiggling around, and it'd be like everybody lived in California. How about this? here's a big word you can learn, the albedo. You say, what's that? That's the reflective quality of the planet. That's what scientists call how much reflection, the reflectivity of the matter of our planet. If the light that comes to us was reflected off at a greater rate and not absorbed, we would freeze. That's the light that warms the planet. If less of it reflected away, again, we'd have the greenhouse and we'd all cook. In other words, God put together the right mix of elements so that just enough sunlight's reflected back and enough water is reflecting the light of the sun back, but yet just enough of it's absorbed to warm and to keep the planet just right. How about the oxygen to nitrogen ratio in the atmosphere? If there was more oxygen than nitrogen, advanced life functions would go too quickly. We'd oxidize. If there was more nitrogen than oxygen, we would slow down our life functions and we would all atrophy. There's just enough nitrogen and just enough oxygen. How about CO2, carbon dioxide? If there was more, we'd have the greenhouse. If there was less, we couldn't have photosynthesis because the plants need that to do their work. How about water? This is number 16 for those of you who are counting. How about water level vapors? If there was too much water, we'd have a greenhouse. If there was less, we'd have a desert. How about lightning? If there was too much atmospheric electrical discharge, our planet would be burned. If there wasn't as much as there is, there would not be enough nitrogen fixed in the atmosphere and fertilizer coming down to make the plants grow, as happens at every lightning storm. How about our ozone? Of course, you know, if there wasn't enough, then the surface temperature would be too high, too much UV, we'd all get skin cancer. If it was more ozone, we would be cold. How about oxygen? If we had too much oxygen, plants and hydrocarbons would burn up. If we have less, we have nothing to breathe. How about earthquakes? Seismic activity. If our planet was not made with such an, remember last week, isostic balance between the water and the mountains, then there would be too much seismic activity, and there would be not an opportunity for us to be still long enough to live. How about soil mineralization? If there wasn't the mineral content we have in our soil as it is, life could not grow from the soil. If there were too many nutrients, we would be limited because of overeating of the nutrients, and actually it would poison. Finally, how about the gravity that we interact with our moon? If we had a bigger moon that was closer or more mass, the tidal effects on the ocean would be that the oceans would wash across the continents much like the waves do across the sea. If we had a smaller moon, or if it was further away, the orbital obliquity would change. It would cause climatic instabilities. The movements of nutrients would move away from the oceans to the continents, and the magnetic fields would be dissipated. Now, all this, let me get back to the science book. Here's what he said. If each of these 23 parameters exceeds even a tiny limit, not to mention the dozen I haven't mentioned, the scientist said, there would be no possibility of life on this planet. And by the way, the 23 things I just read to you are so minutely tied to one another that by multiplying the factors of their probability of occurring, they say that for those 23 events to work in consonance, which is what it takes to have life, there is no place in the entire known universe where life could exist except here. Now let's get back to Genesis 1:1. I said all that to tell you this. And by the way, this writer concludes with this. He said, rather than spending $100 million by the U.S. government each year looking for extraterrestrial intelligence, Senator William Proxmire, the former senator, said, we should better spend the money looking for some intelligent life in Washington. That was a good quote. I thought I didn't want to let you lose that. Back to Genesis 1:1. In the beginning, God, in the whole universe, after making it, formed one planet to put life on. And he tilted it and rotated it and revolved it around the right color star and put just the right moon at the right distance and spun it at the right speed. And then he salted it with just the right number of minerals and trace elements, breathed into it just the right amount of nitrogen, oxygen, and all the other things, and put life in that little fragile canopy of our atmosphere. That's what it says in Genesis 1:1. And within those words we find all there is. God, the universe, the end, and now. Everything is encompassed in those words, and from them flow all the guidelines God has given us to meet Him, to know Him, and to please Him. In other words, no book of the Scriptures matters more than this one. Because every other book, every other doctrine, every other comprehension of God rests right on those 10 words. Because the God you meet in Genesis 1:1 is the same God that's in the rest of the Bible. And if the God of Genesis 1:1 is unreliable, so is the one everywhere else. Either you utterly trust the God you meet in Genesis 1, or you don't have anything else. He's the same, and He doesn't change. And so as we're studying the book you can trust, the book you can trust starts with the first book of the 66 books that make up the one book that you can trust. And I hope this morning that you have an overwhelming awareness of how crucial the truth is that you're going to look at in the book of Genesis this morning, okay?